In the long term, I know that we both agree that the situation in Syria. Thank you once again, Mr. President, for coming to Sweden. I look forward to our program together this afternoon. Please.
Thank you so much. Hey, just exhausted my Swedish. Thank you so much, Prime Minister Reinfeldt, for your very kind words and welcoming me today. I'm proud to be making the first ever bilateral visit by U.S. President to Sweden. It's only been a short time, but I already want to thank all the people here for the warm hospitality that's been extended to me and my delegation. This is truly one of the world's great cities. It is spectacularly beautiful. The Prime Minister tells me that year-round. And so, like so many who've come here, I feel Stockholm in my heart, and I'm sure that I'll want to bring back my family to have a visit sometime in the future. I've said before that it's no accident that democracies are America's closest partners, and that includes Sweden. That's why I'm here today. As free peoples, we recognize that democracy is the most effective form of government ever devised for delivering progress and opportunity and prosperity and freedom to people. And as two of the most innovative economies on earth, we cherish that freedom that allows us to innovate and create, which is why we're leaders in science and research and development, those things that pioneer new industries and broaden our horizons. We share a belief in the dignity and equality of every human being, that our daughters deserve the same opportunities as our sons, that our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters must be treated equally, not weakened by. And we stand up for universal human rights, not only in America and Europe, but beyond, because we believe that when these rights are respected, nations are more successful and our world is safer and more just. So I want to thank Sweden and the Swedish people for being such strong partners in pursuit of these values that we share. The partnership is rooted in deep friendship, but as was also mentioned, we have very strong people-to-people ties. My hometown of Chicago has a lot of people from of Swedish descent. Vice President Biden was honored to welcome King Gustav and Queen Sylvia to the United States earlier this year to mark the 375th anniversary of the first Swedish colony in America, and I'm looking forward to visiting with the King and Queen tomorrow. I should mention on behalf of hockey fans back home in Chicago, I have to say how grateful our championship Blackhawks are for their several teammates who hail from Sweden. So that's been an excellent export that we gladly accept. I had a chance to visit with Prime Minister Reinfeldt in the White House during my first year in office. To be a thoughtful and deliberative partner on a whole host of international issues, and I'm pleased that we've been able to strengthen that partnership in our discussions here today. We, of course, discussed the appalling violence being inflicted on the Syrian people by the Assad regime, including the horrific chemical weapons attacks 2 weeks ago. I discussed our assessment, which clearly implicates the Syrian government in this outrage. The Prime Minister and I are in agreement that in the face of such barbarism, the international community cannot be silent, and that failing to respond to this attack would only increase the risk of more attacks. And the possibility that other countries would use these weapons as well. I respect, and I've said this to the Prime Minister, the UN process. Obviously, the UN investigation team has done heroic work under very difficult circumstances. But we believe very strongly, with high confidence, that in fact chemical weapons were used and that Mr. Assad was the source. And we want to join with the international community in an effective response that deters such use in the future. So I updated the Prime Minister on our efforts to secure congressional authorization for taking action, as well as our effort to continue to build international support for holding the Assad regime accountable in order to deter these kinds of attacks in the future. And we also discussed our broader strategy The United States and Sweden are both major donors of humanitarian assistance to the Syrian people. We will continue those efforts. We're going to continue to try to strengthen the capabilities of an inclusive and representative opposition and to support the diplomacy that could bring an end to all the violence and advance a political transition and a future in Syria where all people's rights are upheld. Those are goals that we share, and we will keep working towards those goals. And more broadly, given Sweden's close partnership with NATO, we also touched on some of the other security challenges, and I expressed my appreciation for the extraordinary work that the Swedish Armed Forces has done in a whole range of issues, including Afghanistan efforts to resolve some of the conflicts in Central Eastern Europe, and the ongoing training that's also being provided, and the good example that's being provided by Swedish Armed Forces here in Europe. Mindful of the jobs that are supported by trade between our two countries, we discussed ways to partner more, including creating a clean energy partnership that creates jobs and combats climate change effectively. Sweden is obviously an extraordinary leader when it comes to tackling climate change and increasing energy efficiency and developing new technologies. And the goal of achieving a carbon neutral economy is remarkable, and Sweden is well on its way. We deeply respect and admire that, and think we can learn from it. In the United States, we've taken some historic steps, doubling our electricity from wind and solar, improving the fuel efficiency of our cars, reducing our carbon pollution to the lowest levels in nearly 20 years, but we all know we need to do more. So my new climate action plan, more clean energy, more energy efficiency, less emissions, will allow us to do even more in the years to come, and we look forward to a close partnership with Sweden on what is going to be a global challenge. And at the Royal Institute of Technology today, I look forward to seeing some of the innovative ways that we can cooperate. We also talked about trade and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP. I want to thank Sweden and the Prime Minister for the strong support of these negotiations, and I believe that for the US and the EU to reach a high standard, comprehensive agreement can create more jobs and opportunity on both sides of the Atlantic. And as I head into the G20, I shared my view that here in Europe and around the world, we've got to stay focused on creating jobs and growth. That's going to be critically important, not only for our economies, but also to maintain stability in many of our democracies that are under severe stress at this point. And finally, I want to salute Sweden along with all the Nordic countries for your strong support for democracy and development, strengthening democratic governance in Eastern Europe, global efforts against AIDS, TB, and malaria, responsible development in Africa. I want to thank in advance the Prime Minister for hosting our meeting tonight with the leaders of all the Nordic countries, and I look forward to our discussion. So to Prime Minister Reinfeldt, thank you so much for your hospitality. To the people of Sweden, thank you. This is a wonderful visit, and I'm looking forward to it producing concrete results that will enhance the lives of both the American people and the people of Sweden. So with that, I think we'll take some questions.
Yes, we'll now open the floor for questions. The first question goes to Swedish news agency TT, Tina Magnegård-Bjärs.
Mr. President, welcome to Sweden.
Thank you.
As you might know, the NSA surveillance affair has stirred up quite a few angry reactions, even here in Sweden. What do you want to say to those upset, and how do you think the affair affects the relationship between our countries? And as a follow-up to that, I know that at home you are sometimes accused of wanting to turn the US into Sweden. Now, now that you're here, you've been here for several hours, what have you seen? What actually inspires you? What do you want to import to the US in terms of ideas for society?
Well, let me take the NSA question first, because this is a question that I've received in previous visits to Europe since the stories broke in The Guardian, and I suspect I'll continue to get as I travel through Europe and around the world for quite some time. Like other countries, we have an intelligence operation that tries to improve our understanding of what's happening around the world. And in light of 9/11, a lot of energy was focused on improving our intelligence when it came to combating terrorism. And what I can say with confidence is that when it comes to our domestic operations, the concerns that people have back home in the United States of America, that we do not surveil the American people or persons within the United States, that there are a lot of checks and balances in place designed to avoid a surveillance state. There have been times where the procedures, because these are human endeavors, have not worked the way they should, and we had to tighten them up. And I think there are legitimate questions that have been raised about the fact that as technology advances and capabilities grow, it may be that the laws that are currently in place are not sufficient to guard against the dangers of us being able to track so much. Now, when it comes to intelligence gathering internationally, our focus is on counterterrorism, weapons of mass destruction, cybersecurity, core national security interests of the United States. But what is true is that the United States has enormous capabilities when it comes to intelligence. One way to think about it is in the same way that our military capabilities are significantly greater than many other countries. The same is true for our intelligence capabilities. So even though we may have the same goals, our means are significantly greater. And I can give assurances to the publics in Europe and around the world that we're not going around snooping at people's emails or listening to their phone calls. What we're trying to do is to target very specifically areas of concern. Having said that, what I've said domestically and what I say to international audiences is, with changes in technology, with the growth of our capabilities, if our attitude is because we can do it, we should go ahead and do it, then we may not be addressing some of the legitimate concerns and dangers that exist anytime we're talking about intelligence gathering and surveillance. So what I've asked my national security team to do, as well as independent persons who are well-known lawyers or civil libertarians or privacy experts to do, is to review everything that we're doing with the instructions to them that we have to balance the ends with the means. And just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it. And there may be situations in which we're gathering information just because we can, that doesn't help us with our national security, but does raise questions in terms of whether we're tipping over into being too intrusive with respect to the interactions of other governments. And that is something that we are currently reviewing carefully. We are consulting with the EU in this process. We are consulting with other countries in this process and finding out from them what are their areas of specific concern and trying to align what we do in a way that I think alleviates some of the public concerns that people may have. But this is always going to be there's going to be some balancing that takes place on these issues. You know, some of the folks who've been most greatly offended publicly, we know privately engage in the same activities directed at us, or use information that we've obtained to protect their people. And we recognize that, but I think all of us have to take a very thoughtful approach to this problem. And I'm the first one to acknowledge that given advances in technology and the fact that so much of our information flow today is through the internet, through wireless, that the risks of abuse are greater than they have been in the past. Now, with respect to Sweden, you know, I haven't had a chance to wander around Stockholm as much as I would like. It is a gorgeous country. What I know about Sweden, I think, offers us some good lessons. Number one, the work you've done on energy, I think, is something that the United States can and will learn from. Because every country in the world right now has to recognize that if we're going to continue to grow, improve our standard of living, while maintaining a sustainable planet, then we're going to have to change our patterns of energy use. And Sweden, I think, is far ahead of many other countries. Sweden also has been able to have a robust market economy, while recognizing that there are some investments in education or infrastructure or research that are important. And there's no contradiction between making public investments and being a firm believer in free markets. And that's a debate and a discussion that we often have in the United States. You know, I have to say that if I were here in Europe, I'd probably be considered right in the middle, maybe center left, maybe center right, depending on the country. In the United States, sometimes the names I'm called are quite different. And I think a third observation and final observation I'd make is though I know that I'm sure Frederick doesn't feel this as he's engaging in difficult debates here, I do get a sense that the politics in Sweden right now involve both the ruling party and the opposition engaged in a respectful and rational debate that's based on facts and issues. And you know, I think that kind of recognition that people can have political differences, but we're all trying to achieve the same goals. And that's something that Swedes should be proud of and should try to maintain.
The first question from the American press goes to Steve Holland of Reuters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, sir. Have you made up your mind whether to take action against Syria, whether or not you have a congressional resolution approved? Is a strike needed in order to preserve your credibility for when you set these sort of red lines? And were you able to enlist the support of the Prime Minister here for support in Syria?
Let me unpack the question. First of all, I didn't set a red line. The world set a red line. The world set a red line when governments representing 98% of the world's population said the use of chemical weapons are abhorrent, and passed a treaty forbidding their use even when countries are engaged in war. Congress set a red line when it ratified that treaty. Congress set a red line when it indicated that in a piece of legislation titled the Syria Accountability Act that some of the horrendous things that are happening on the ground there need to be answered for. And so when I said in a press conference that my calculus about what's happening in Syria would be